Good evening. We will be reading Nicomachean Ethics, Book 2, and this is going to be on how moral virtue is acquired. It's interesting to note that in Plato's Meno, there is a dialogue between Socrates and Meno, and it seems to indicate that virtue is not teachable, at least that it is some kind of a divine gift, and it's not something that can be taught. We're going to be getting Aristotle's perspective on the matter to the extent that we can see if there is a perspective that indicates moral virtue is teachable, or if there is a definition, because that's the other thing, that Plato never had a definition of what is virtue. And Socrates in the dialogue claims that he was completely clueless what virtue even was, and Meno also had the same perspective after Socrates questioned him on it, that he couldn't even define what virtue was. So this is going to be interesting because Aristotle's going to define virtue, and we're going to find out what he thinks virtue is, even though Socrates had no clue what virtue was or how to define it according to Plato's Meno. Without further ado, we're going to start with English, and again, go back and forth reading a section in English first and then Greek. And right now we're just going to do the first two sections before we take a little break. Section 1, moral virtue as the result of habits. Virtue, as we have seen, consists of two kinds: intellectual virtue and moral virtue. Intellectual virtue, or excellence, owes its origin and development chiefly to teaching, and for that reason requires experience and time. Moral virtue, on the other hand, is formed by habit, ethos, and its name, ethike, is therefore derived by a slight variation from ethos. This shows, too, that none of the moral virtues is implanted in us by nature, for nothing which exists by nature can be changed by habit. For example, it is impossible for a stone, which has a natural downward movement, to become habituated to moving upward, even if one should try 10,000 times to inculcate the habit by throwing it in the air. Nor can fire be made to move downward, nor can the direction of any nature-given tendency be changed by habituation. Thus, the virtues are implanted in us neither by virtue, nor contrary to virtue, nor contrary to nature. We are by nature equipped with the ability to receive them, and habit brings this ability to completion and fulfillment. Furthermore, of all the qualities with which we are endowed by nature, we are provided with the capacity first and display the activity afterward. That this is true is shown by the senses. It is not by frequent seeing or frequent hearing that we acquired our senses, but on the contrary, we possess and then use them. We do not acquire them by use. The virtues, on the other hand, we acquire by first having put them into action, and the same is also true of the arts. For the things which we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing. Men become builders by building houses, and harpers by playing the harp. Similarly, we become just by the practice of just actions, self-controlled by exercising self-control, and courageous by performing acts of courage. This is corroborated by what happens in states. Lawgivers make the citizens good by inculcating good habits in them, And this is the aim of every lawgiver. If he does not succeed in doing that, his legislation is a failure. It is in this that a good constitution differs from a bad one. Moreover, the same causes and the same means that produce any excellence or virtue can also destroy it. And this is also true of every art. It is by playing the harp that men become both good and bad harpists, and correspondingly with builders and all other craftsmen. A man who builds well will be a good builder, one who builds badly, a bad one. For if this were not so, there would be no need for an instructor. But everyone would be born as a good or bad craftsman. The same holds true of the virtues. In our transactions with other men, it is by action that some become just and others unjust. And it is by acting in the face of danger and by developing the habit of feeling fear or confidence that some become brave men and others cowards. The same applies to the appetites and feelings of anger. By reacting in one way or in another to given circumstances, some people become self controlled and gentle, and others self indulgent and short tempered. In a word, characteristics develop from corresponding activities. For that reason, we must see to it that our activities are of a certain kind, since any variations in them will be reflected in our characteristics. Since it is no small matter whether one habit or another is inculcated in us from early childhood. On the contrary, it makes a considerable difference, or rather, all the difference. And I'm going to make a quick note on this reference to early childhood and developing moral character. It's a very good reference. Okay, so we're going to read the same thing in Greek now. And this is the original, having been written by Aristotle. The tis aratis usis, tis men dia noetikis, tis the ethikis. Men dia noetiki, to plion ek didaskalias ekhi, ke tin genisin, ke tin avxisin, dioper empirias dita, ke chrono e dithiki exethus periginita. Othon ke tunama eskike mikron por eklinon apotuethus. Ex u ke vilon oti udamia ton ethikon oraton fisi emingignita. Engignita. Uthen garton fisi ondon alos athesita. Ion olithos fisi kato pheromenos ukon ethisthei ano phereitha. Uthen myriakes of tone ethesi tis ano reptone. Uthe to pircato, uthe allo uthen ton allos pefikoton allos on ethisthei, utara fisi utipara fisin gignita and gignunda earate. Ella pefikosi man imin thekasavtos. Teliumenithe diatuethus, eti osa men fisi imin paragignita, tas sinamis tuton proteron komizometha. Isteron the tas energias apovidomen. Oper epiton ton aestheseon dilon. Ugar ek tu polakis idin e polakis accusa tas aestheses elavamen. Alanapolin ekondas ekrisamatha ukrisamani eskamen. Tas the oratas lamvanamen energisandas proteron. Osperke epiton alon technon agar the mathondas pien. Tafta piundas mathanomen. Eon ikathemundas ikathomi gignunda. Ke kitharizondas kithariste. Uto the keta men dikea pratunda dikea gignometha. Ta the sophronas, ta the andrii. Martiri the ke to ginomenon entes policin. Igar nomotheta tus politas ethizondas piusin agathus ke to men vulima pandos no mithetu tut estin. Osi the mi ev of to piusin amartonusin, ke the afferi tuto politias agathi favlis. Eti ek tone of tone, ke the tone of tone, ke gignata, pasa orati, ke flirita. Omios that ke tachni. Ekgar tu katharizin ke agathi ke kaki gignonda kathariste analogon the ke ikadomi ke ili pi pandas. Ekmen gar tu ev ikodomin agathi ikodomi esenda. Ek the tu kakos kaki. Igar mi utos iken u then on ethi tu didaxondos. Alapandas on egignondo agathi ikaki. Uto the ke epitonoraton eki pratondas garta entis sinalagmasi tis prostus anthropus genometha emen dikei e the adiki pratondas that entis dinis keathis omini fo vista etharin emen andrii e the leave. Omios the ke ta peritas epithemias aki ke ta peritas orgas emen gar sophronas ke prai gignonda. The colisti ke orgili emen actu utasi in avtis anastrefista the actu utasi. Ke the logo ectonomion energion a axis gignonda. The tas energias pias apodidonda. Katagar tas tuton diaphoras akoluthusin a axis u micron un diapheri to utos e utos aphthes ekneon athesis the Allah pompolymalon the topon. That's the end of section 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics. And I see somebody in the chat. So much is over my head. However, I feel like you're doing something different and honest. Hopefully more will follow these uploads and stick with you. So Joshua, thank you for your comment. For sure, this is not something I've seen anybody else do. And it's definitely over a lot of people's head. This is over my head too. But I think reading them and reading aloud is helpful. Helpful for me as a reader, but also for somebody else as a listener. And it's helpful to read both the English aloud and also the Greek aloud. And again, you can see I'm using the modern pronunciation. So again, thank you for gonna pin the message. And we'll continue on with section 2 and read section 2 before I start another stream. I think keeping these relatively short is probably easier. If I make them too long, again, just got to go on forever and ever. So we're going to say that he's definitely making virtue out to be connected with habit, which is interesting. And we'll read the second section. Method in the practical sciences. The purpose of the present study is not, as it is in other inquiries, the attainment of theoretical knowledge. We are not conducting this inquiry in order to know what virtue is, but in order to become good. Else, there would be no advantage for studying it. For that reason, it becomes necessary to examine the problem of action and to ask how they are to be performed. For, as we have said, the actions determine what kind of characteristics are developed. That we must act according to right reason is generally conceded and may be assumed as the basis of our discussion. We shall speak about it later and discuss what right reason is and examine its relation to the other virtues. But let us first agree that any discussion on matters of action cannot be more than an outlet and is bound to lack precision. For as we stated at the outset, one can demand of a discussion only what the subject matter permits, and there are no fixed data in matters concerning action and questions of what is beneficial, any more than there are matters of health. And if this is true, and if it's true of our general discussion, our treatment of particular problems will be even less precise, since these do not come under the head of any art which can be transmitted, but precepts, but the agent must consider on each different occasion what the situation demands, just as in medicine and navigation. But although such is the kind of discussion in which we are engaged, we must do our best. First of all, it must be observed that the nature of moral qualities is such that they are destroyed by defect and by excess. We see the same thing happen in the case of strength and health, to illustrate, as we must, the invisible by means of visible examples. Excess, as well as deficiency of physical exercise, destroys our strength, and similarly, too much and too little food destroys our health. The proportionate amount, however, produces, increases, and preserves it. The same applies to self-control, courage, and the other virtues. The man who shuns and fears everything and never stands his ground becomes a coward, whereas a man who knows no fear all at all and goes to meet every danger becomes reckless. Similarly, a man who revels in every pleasure, and abstains from none becomes self-indulgent, while he who avoids every pleasure, like a boar, becomes what might be called insensitive. Thus, we see that self-control and courage are destroyed by excess and by deficiency, and are preserved by the mean. Not only are the same actions which are responsible for and instrumental in the origin and development of the virtues also the causes and means of their destruction, but they will also be manifested in the active exercise of the virtues. We can see the truth of this in the case of other visible qualities. Strength. Strength is produced by consuming plenty of food and by enduring much hard work. And it is the strong man who is the best to do these things. The same is also true of the virtues. By abstaining from pleasures, we become self-controlled. And once we are self-controlled, we are best able to abstain from pleasures. So also with courage, by becoming habituated in the desire, by becoming habituated to despise and to endure terrors, we become courageous. And once we become courageous, we will best be able to endure terror. That is the end of section 2. And that was in the English. And so we are going to look at that same section, small little section, in Greek now. Epiun iparousa pragmatia ou therias enika esti osper e ale ugar ina idomen tiesti ert skeptomatha. All ina agathi genomatha epi uthen on in ophilos of tis. Anakeon episkepsista ta peri tas praxis. Post prakteon of tas. Aftegari sin kyrie ke tu pias genasta tas exis katha per irikamen tomen un kataton orthon logon pratin kinon ke ipokisto rethisita theisteron periaftu ke tsd orthos logos ke posaki prostas alas oratas ekino the pro theo mo lo gisto oti paso periton procton logos tipo ke uk akrivos ophili legista osper ke katarchas iro ipomen oti katatin ilin ilogi apetiteo epititei. Ta the entes praxisi ke ta simferonda u then esti kosechi osperu the ta igiana. Tiutu the ondos tu katholulogu etimalon o periton kath ekoste logos ukaki ta krives utegar ipotechnin uth ipoparangelion uthamion pipti the thaftus aitus protondas ta proston keronskopin osper ke epitis iatrikis ehi ke tis kivernitikis ala keper ondos tiuto tu parondos logu pirateon voithin proton un tuto theriteon, otitatiaf te pefican, ip envias que hypervolis theres the digari per ton aphanon tis phaneris martyris. Christa. Osper epitis ischios, catis igias, oromen, ta tegar hyper volunda gymnasia, que ta eliponda theory tin iskin. Homios de que ta pota, que ta sitia. Pleo que elato genomena theory tin igian. Ta the symmetra que pi que avtsi que sozi. Utos un que epi phronosinis que andrias echi que tonalon ereton. Otagar ponda fevgon que fovumenos que mi then ipomenon the loskinata, ota mi then olos fovumenos, alapros pondovadizon thrasis omios, the que o men passis idonis apolavon, que mi the mias apocomenos arcolistos, o the pas on fevgon, usper e agriki, anestitostis, phthirita thee, sophrosini, ke iandria, ipotis hypervolis, ke tis ellipseos, ipo that tis mistotitos, sosita. Alumonon egenesis, ke avxis, ke ephthore, ecton of tone, ke ipo tone of tone ginunda, alake e energie entis of tis asunda, ke gar epitone alon tone phoneroteron utos eki, ion epitis ischios, ginetegar ectu polintrophin lamvanin, ke polus ponus ipomenin, ke malista on vinat avta piin o iskiros. Uto the eki ke epitonoriton ek tegar to apekista ton idonon genomatha sophronas. Ke genomini malista dinamatha apekista ton. O mios the ke epitis andrias ethizomatha ethizomini gar kataphronin ton foveron ke ipomenin avta genomatha andrii ke genomini malista thinisomatha ipomenin ta fovera. And that is the end of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Book 2, Section 2. And that is where I'm going to call it quits for the stream for right now, because I am going to want to try to keep these somewhat short so that I don't have this all together for the stream to be hours and hours and hours. I'll try to keep it tolerable, and we'll continue with Section 3 either later tonight or in the near future. So thank you all for watching. Philia and adio.